Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with David Tarus, Executive Director of the Association for Christian Theological Education in Africa, better known as ACTEA, to talk about the state of biblical and theological education in Africa. The church is growing there, and with it, the need to train the next generation of ministry leaders. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of the Association for Biblical Higher Education. I have a dear friend joining me today on this podcast episode. It's somebody that I've gotten to know through ICET, which is the International Council for Evangelical Theological Education. That's something that ABHE is part of. And in a lot of ways, my guest, David Tarus, he's the executive director of the Association for Christian Theological Education in Africa. I know it as ACTEA. We all know it as ACTEA, but that's officially the name. And basically, he is what I do in North America. He is that to the continent or a lot of African countries. And so I've invited him in to just kind of have a conversation about what his experiences are. What is he seeing in biblical and theological education across the continent of Africa? And just to have a conversation about what biblical and theological education looks like outside of North America. So David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Philip.
This is just a conversation, just to kind of find out what God is doing. So we know, and sometimes I fall into this trap. You know, we talk about Africa as if it's one country. So when I ask this question, I do it within the context of knowing it's a big continent with multiple countries and languages and cultures represented. But the best way that you can give us a high-level summary of the work of ACTEA across the continent of Africa.
So ACTEA is a ministry of the Association of Evangelicals in Africa. We'll be celebrating 50 years next year. We started in 1976 in March as Accrediting Council for Theological Education in Africa. ACTEA's mission is to strengthen theological education. And we do that through three ways, three missional pillars. We do that through accreditation, research, and capacity building. And the goal or the reason for that is so that we can serve the church and transform society. So you're right, we serve the entire continent except the northern part of Africa, which is part of the Middle East and the North Africa network in ICET. And we do our ministry around theological education from the Portuguese part of Africa, what is called Lusophone, the English part of Africa, the Anglophone, and the Francophone part of Africa, that is the Francophone. So we have close to 35 schools that we serve, and we visit these institutions. A few of them have transitioned to university status, but majority are theological institutions, seminaries, Bible schools, mid-level. A few of them would be large institutions, like one that we have in Nigeria, actually the oldest theological institution on the continent of Africa. I spoke at their 125th graduation about 2 years ago, and they have about 2,500 students.
Wow. And that's a Bible college, or
yes, that's a Bible college. It's called Nigeria Baptist Theological Seminary.
Okay.
It's in Nigeria. So we do accreditation. So we have 5 things that we look at when we visit an institution. That is all aspects of administration, including governance of the institutions, issues to do with policies, with strategic plans, with sustainability of the institution. We look also at the aspects of teaching staff to make sure that the institution has faculty that are qualified, that are able to serve the mission of the institution. We look at facilities, and the question around facilities is this: are the facilities sufficient to support the programs of which the institution is applying for accreditation? So facilities, of course, would include libraries, would include classrooms. And for those institutions that have online programs, we would look, of course, at the learning management system, the student integrated systems, and of course, the entire online infrastructure to make sure that it is able to support the programs that the institution is seeking accreditation for. And then also we look at the educational program. So in terms of educational program, we accredit programs from the certificate level to the doctoral level. And we look at, of course, the availability of the curriculum. We look at the resources. Are the resources enough to support the programs? Are they current? Are they missing something? We look also in terms of credit hours. We look in terms of relevance of the programs. And sometimes we are so sad that you have institutions that borrow curriculum from the West, for example, and they utilize it without amendment. So we're able to interrogate that, at least help the schools to think about the validity and the contextuality of the programs that they offer, and help them to, in case they're missing something.
Yeah,
And
pause
finally,
right there because I think this is we'll get back to the other pieces, but I think this is an important piece
yeah,
that we got to talk about it a little bit. And I'd say this is a global issue, and you and I face it when we have conversations around the board table with ISET, with others like us representing other parts of the country, where theological education has a westernized kind of approach to it. Largely because it were missionaries from the West who came into African contexts or Asian contexts, and they knew nothing better than to just bring what they had. I don't think they had nefarious reasons to bring the curriculum from the West. Go a little bit further with that, because I think it's an important point of contextualizing biblical and theological education in Africa, the continent, but even more specifically within each one of the countries.
Yes, that is right. The missionaries came to Africa. Majority of them, of course, the mission work in Africa started in the late 1900s, 1800s. And missionaries came here with the purpose of planting churches. And of course, soon after that, they will plant Bible schools. And the curriculum that they gave us, or that this they used, oftentimes addressed the questions not of the African people, but the questions for Westerners. For example, a very good example is whole conversations in apologetics on the existence of God, which is, I think it's a legitimate question, but no African is asking that question. For the traditional African, the existence of God was assumed. It was a given. So Africans always believed that God existed. But we have deeper realities, deeper questions around good and evil, around magic, around can a Christian be cursed, around issues of suffering, of poverty, issues of conflict, of war, and recently all conversations around radicalization, persecution, and so on and so on, and political abuse, corruption. All those issues are really the issues that churches are wrestling with. And sometimes you have a seminary that is not asking any of those questions. So you still have seminaries that are doing really solid theological work, dogmatics. You can easily think that this is a seminary that was started for the church in Germany or something. All these Enlightenment questions and frameworks are still informing theological education. So there's been a lot of conversation around what people are calling a colonized curriculum. So the questions of being able to say, yes, this might be good for providing a broader view of theological education, a more global view. But then what about the questions that churches are asking here? How can we form students for the church in Africa that are able to help the church answer the questions that they're asking and be able to help the church theologize around different realities of the moment? So that is a very, very serious issue. It also informs, as I mentioned, issues of resources in terms of theological resources, the books. Which books are we going to assign students? Are they going to be balanced? Are we going to assign Africana resources? And also because of the dynamics of publishing and distribution on the continent, sometimes we find that people are writing, but those resources are not getting to the theological schools. Or those resources are there, but the faculty members are not requiring them. They could possibly list them as other resources, or they might not be mandatory reading. So we are able to say, yes, you are doing a systematic theology, you have a course on theology of God or theological anthropology, you have these particular references from the West, Have you thought about this? Why don't you require the following resources as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that informs issues of budget. Are you
Yeah.
going to have a budget to purchase those textbooks?
Thanks for walking into that, and for our audience, I think it's a sensitive subject, because even hearing the word, the colonization of curriculum, I'd say here in North America, we, especially those of us who are within the framework of evangelical Christianity, we kind of bristle when we hear that, because we see it as a condemnation of good intention. And that's not what we're saying here. It's out of an appreciation for what the missionary. My parents were missionaries in North Africa. My mom went as a single missionary, as a nurse, to Casablanca. She felt called, and she responded to that. So it's not a criticism of that in the past. And I think it's an opportunity for our institutions to know, okay, so if you do have, and many of our institutions have relationships with institutions or countries, they've sent missionaries to those countries, or they've built relationships with them, how best they can serve them. And that's kind of our last question, and we'll get to that here in a second. But it's kind of an awareness that just sending over extra library books isn't necessarily a help to institutions, because those are all written from a context that is not an African context. So trying to find ways that they can partner with institutions that'll be the most helpful to them. How would you say within Africa, how deep is the theological writing? So do you have theologians in the past and current who are writing books on theology, textbooks on theology, on biblical narrative, those kinds of things from an African context? How broad is that?
It is very, very broad. We have seen a lot of writing and publishing from the continent,
Mm-hmm.
what I normally called theology emanating from the African soil. This was actually a passion of the founder of ACTEA, Dr. Biancato, is considered the father of the evangelical theology in Africa. He envisioned and he said, the future of the church in Africa depends on four things. It depends on quality theological education from the grassroots to the highest levels. Secondly, it depends on standardization, regulation, harmonization, of theological education, making sure that we have a quality assurance body. And then number three, which is now relevant to your question, is it depends on publications by African scholars on issues affecting the church and society in Africa. Number four, it depends on a specialized ministry for children and youth. And so those key pillars, which is POC in 1975, and that is about 50 years ago, I think are really critical. And we have seen a lot of intentionality, lots and lots of African scholars writing. From Kenya, we have John Beatty, we have in Nigeria and Ghana, we have Kwame Bediako, we have the work of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians that was founded in 1986. That the last time I checked, about 5 years ago, they had more than 340 different resources that they generated, this group
Wow.
of African women theologians. And this week, actually, yesterday, they finished a conference. They had a conference for Francophone African women theologians. So there is a lot of literature coming from different corners of the continent. The challenge is not the publication. The challenge is not the writing. The challenge is the distribution. So you have resources coming from Nigeria. Let's say, for example, in the northern part of Nigeria, where we have the headquarters of the Africa Christian Textbooks, ACTS Bookshop, massive warehouse there. But then those resources are not crossing to the other parts of Africa. You have resources coming from East Africa that are not getting to the southern part of Africa, and so on and so forth. So we are not able to read one another. And so there has been a lot of conversations around distribution. There is an organization called Africa Speaks that is now helping spearhead or at least accelerate conversations around distribution.
What are the roadblocks for distribution? Is it simply a matter of resource, or are there governmental issues that you have to face too?
It's governmental issues of taxes, and sometimes even the lack of awareness. If you don't know who is publishing and we don't know who is
Yeah.
doing what outside your own country, you might not be able to acquire those resources. But also the cost of publication. Publication is still quite expensive and prohibitive. So you find a book that you can get an alternative book in the West that is cheaper. So I have tried, Philip, to really advocate for publishing on the continent. So, like, for example, I've talked to one of our partners that helps, give us books that we could distribute to theological institutions. I have always said, could you give us money instead, and we can purchase books from Edition Clay in Cameroon, this particular group that is publishing books for Francophone Africa. So instead of buying books from France, or, could we get the books from Cameroon? Instead of buying books from Brazil, could we buy books from Angola and support a publisher in Angola? So that is the only way we could make sure that we're able to resource those publishing houses and enable them to maybe even subsidize or have funds that can make sure that the books they sell are cheaper and accessible for schools.
Yeah. So I'd challenge a listener, if you're out there and you have a passion and burden for theological education outside of North America, one of the best ways that you can help is, like you just said, help in the distribution of those resources, not necessarily sending the Western books over. But to me, that's the lasting impact. This is so critical to get right, not for our current generations, though they will obviously be recipients of it, but we're talking about future generations, so that there is a rich context of scholarship that can be leveraged at these various institutions. You mentioned you work with 35 institutions. There are way more than that.
35 countries. 35 countries.
35 countries. How many institutions would you say?
Close to 100. Close to 100.
Okay. So 100 institutions then, but there are definitely more Bible colleges and institutions across Africa who aren't accredited. Is that a correct statement?
That is correct. That's correct.
Yeah. Do you have any guess as to what that number is?
We actually have a database in our office of close to 1,000 schools in Africa. Could be more. So the dynamics of accreditation, this is what happens. So one, we have many small institutions, maybe church-based institutions or vernacular institutions, or just seminaries that are denominational that might not have the capacity to meet the standards, the ACTEA standards. And a very good example are the schools in my own denomination in Kenya. So I come from a denomination called the Africa Inland Church, started by the Africa Inland Mission. And we have 42 theological institutions, and only 3 are ACTEA accredited. So majority are small Bible schools that still teach in either Swahili or even the local languages. And some might not even have libraries. They might not have qualified faculty. They might not have a good curriculum that meets our standards. And of course, the major challenge again would be admissions. So some of them would admit students that are not qualified, that are not post-secondary. So ACTEA would not naturally accredit those schools. But we have tried to, when we convene conferences, for example, capacity building workshops, we invite these institutions to the family so that they can begin to work on the standards. So about 2 weeks ago, here in Nairobi in February, we're training for ICT and librarians, and we invited 37 schools. And in Kenya, we only have about 10 schools that are ACTEA accredited. So the majority were not part of ACTEA, but they really appreciated that. But the second dynamic is also, we have now in some countries that accredit theological education. So you have, like in the Francophone region of Africa, they have entities from those regions that support theological education. We question that sometimes because what they call accreditation, sometimes it's registration. So you have just been registered by government. It's not really accreditation.
Right.
We ask them like, no, nobody visited us, but we are accredited by the government. And then we have schools that have transitioned from being a seminary to a university status in Ghana, in Kenya, in some regions. And that poses a little bit of challenges, and I was actually going to talk about that, which is really complex. So you have a seminary that was doing very well, training pastors, and then governments forced them to become a university to get accreditation, and now they're wrestling with other dynamics. They're wrestling with other challenges, like mission drift, for example. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And that's what's amazing to me is that's similar in the United States, North America, where the pursuit of something else, whether it's a good pursuit or neutral or whatever, to have more students, oftentimes pulls one away from a mission. That's a universal issue for sure. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about accreditation is here in North America, accreditation has a connection not only to quality assurance and all of the benchmarks that you talked about. We would have something very similar, but student financial aid from the federal government is processed through an accredited institution. So institutions are wise to be accredited to have access to what's referred to as Title IV funding. That doesn't exist in Africa. So when an organization is seeking accreditation, financial motivation is not one of the reasons why they're doing it. It really is about quality assurance, better serving the student. And it's neat to hear that you almost have like a supply chain of institutions that look, you may not be accredited now, but we're here as a resource to help you build your library or to build your curriculum from an African context, and you're providing those resources to institutions outside of those that are accredited by you.
You're absolutely right. So we do not get funding from government unless you become a university and your students can qualify for loans. But in most cases, you don't get funding when you become accredited by ACTEA. And of course, we are still struggling as ACTEA to get recognition from government. So we are recognized within the Christian community, within ISET, but governments really say, well, we only work with government accreditation agencies. So right now we are actually lobbying. We are doing a lot of lobbying right now for ACTEA to be recognized in Kenya as an accreditor. And that includes actually amendments of some laws, saying that, we need to create room for accreditors that deal with religious education, not just a government accrediting body like the Commission for University Education. Because what that has done is that you are forcing seminaries to transition to university status. Some institutions will not transition, even if they wanted, because they don't have the capacity. They would not, or even their mission won't allow them. They were started as denominational institutions not to offer higher education, liberal arts higher education. All they are concerned about is educating people, training them for ministry. They don't want to become a university. So if you force them to become university, and that is not their mission, you're actually ruining those institutions. And we have seen this happening a lot in many schools in Kenya that transitioned. Now they are really struggling. One institution that was a Bible school is a university now. They have 6 theology students, 6, in the midst of about 2,000 plus students doing other courses, but only 6 theological students. So you really basically killed that institution. The issue that is also really bothering me when it comes to theological education is all aspects of sustainability. So you have this assumption, and I don't know whether this is true in the US, the assumption that you make money by admitting students. So there is always that assumption that, well, we gotta be a university so that we can get more students and make more money. But what I always tell the schools is that the more students you have to raise more money to meet the difference, because you cannot charge a student the actual cost of their education. So theological education, and I think education in general, is always subsidized. So you need to raise money to be able to support the students, to be able to pay the difference, because the students will never pay the actual cost. So if you admitted 1,000 students, you need to raise more money to support those students. So you have institutions transitioning to university with the assumption that we're going to break even, you're going to have money, and then they start running into big loss and selling land and doing all these crazy things to mitigate the losses that they're incurring. And it is a big problem. So the economics of theological education is very, very complex here.
As you look at the landscape, what encourages you the most with biblical and theological education? Like, what are you seeing that maybe it's traction in certain areas, or
Mm.
developing leaders for the church? What encourages you?
Well, what encourages me is the resilience that I see with the schools. Schools are really resilient. You visit the schools, some of them are located in very difficult environments. Think about the school in Eastern Congo, University of Shalom Bunia. It is in Bunia. It's a place where they are in conflicts. One time I had a Zoom call with the vice chancellor of University of Shalom Bunia. And then he was telling me, David, can you hear that? Gunshots. You know, I've been to northern part of Nigeria where every single day a pastor disappears. Every single day there's a kidnapping. You know, one of our schools in Nigeria, they lost the entire library to to terrorists. They came and burned the campus and burned the library. So the library they currently have, they built it from the scratch, started looking for resources and so on. So you have all these schools that are really in very difficult environments, political, in some countries, the political instability. You have coup d'etats in some regions, and yet you have seminaries that are really doing all they can to be able to continue producing men and women for ministry. That resilience, that commitment, that dedication is what really encourages me. And you have faculty members who are sacrificing. They had an option to leave their seminaries and teach in the universities. I know one seminary leader who has 2 PhDs, one in development, economic development, and another one in Old Testament from University of Pretoria. But he's teaching in a small Bible school in Ethiopia. That guy could go to University of Addis and teach there. I was speaking last week on Sunday at Capstone Bible College, and you meet faculty members there. A few of them, two of them that I know, were high school teachers. They resigned, they went to ministry, they're not being paid enough, and yet they continue training people. They are doing church planting. They are visiting students in their field ministry assignments. That resilience is what encourages me the most.
Yeah. Wow. That is so powerful. And just to be an encouragement, and I think even a challenge to our listeners and all of us, we get myopic in our world. We talk about silos in higher education where we just head down and we do our work and forget that there's a whole nother world out there. And I think what you've done is really helped us see the bigger picture. I doubt that anybody that's listening here in North America has an experience of being on a Zoom call and hearing gunshots in the background, or knowing that you're operating in a country, preparing ministry leaders in a country where every day a pastor is kidnapped and oftentimes killed. We think we have struggles, and they're real. We have struggles with the federal government and Department of Education, and we have our own little context over here, but that pales in comparison to the context. And I love how you brought out the resilient component of it, because they're following something bigger than a country, a school, even a local church. They're serving the Lord Jesus Christ, and that's their motivation. And we know that the power of the Holy Spirit indwells them and encourages them and motivates them. So, David, we kind of touched on it in our conversation. Give us one or two practical things. Like if we have a listener's like, okay, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and help out. What's the best way that we in North America can engage in cooperative efforts to truly globally train the next generation of ministry leaders?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, permit me I will answer by reading
Okay.
a quotation from from an article written by a Kenyan theologian we used to teach in Europe. This is what he wrote in 1976. That's 50 years ago. This is John Beatty. He says, "We have eaten theology with you. We have drunk theology with you. We have dreamed theology with you. It has been all one-sided. It has all been, in a sense, your theology. We know you theologically. The question is, do you know us theologically? You become a major subconscious part of our theologizing. And we are privileged to be so involved in you through the fellowship we share in Christ Jesus? Will you make us part of your subconscious process of theologizing? So this is 50 years ago. And what John Beatty was doing was to encourage the church in the Western world to also consider the theologies coming from the majority world. And I wonder if things have changed. The schools in the Western world, are they reading majority world theologians? Are they reading books from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America? When you teach a class about theological anthropology, do you recommend resources from South Africa, for example? Do you tell your students to read the work of Desmond Tutu or Ubuntu? Do you recommend resources about some aspects of theology coming from Nigeria, from a resource from one of my professors, Professor Emiola Nihilola, talking about theology under the mango tree? Are you reading us? So that is what probably I would say. I would want to see schools in America also read us, listen to us, ask us questions, reach out to us, say, hey, we are theologizing this way. Are we missing something? Is there a blind spot? Is there something we don't see that you guys see? What other ways are you thinking about Christ? Are you thinking about the church? I guarantee you, for example, that schools in your part of the world have not thought about the church as a kingdom, not kingdom, kin, K-I-N, the kingdom. A Ghanaian scholar, Mercy Oduoye, who is the founder of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, said the church is a kingdom constituting of relatives of Christ. It's like, that is a new one, What about when you think about Imago Dei? Is there a different way of looking at our creation in the image of God coming from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America? That would be a gift to the church in the Western world. If you're able to read us, if you're able to listen to us, and now with YouTube, of course, you can download resources from Africa. With e-resources, you can access books from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America. We are reading you guys. You don't even have to tell us to read you. We are reading you. We are reading Karl Barth. We are reading Jukan Moltmann. I'm reading Philip Dearborn's. I'm reading Banner Group, all these reports from the Banner Group. But are you reading us? Are you resourcing theologies from Africa? That would be a gift. We are not asking you for anything. We are not telling you send us money. We are not telling you to send us books. We are requesting you read us, read Africa. See what God is doing in Africa. If this is the center of gravity of the Christian faith, as many scholars, Philip Jenkins have said, and Joe Carpenter and many others have said, and Kwame Bidiako, that the center of gravity of Christianity has shifted to Africa. If this is where things are happening, then you better know what is happening here. How is the church being constituted here? How are people wrestling with different realities here? That, I think, would be a gift for the church in the West.
So well said, David. And I just want to say thank you for being a guest, sharing your wisdom, sharing your insights, your experiences, but also this challenge right here at the end. We need to be in a position of listening. So I pray that as you've listened to this episode, that the Spirit has touched your heart to do exactly what David just said, and pause and not just think about giving money or giving books, but actually listening in and hearing what's coming from Africa. So David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, brother.
And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about ACTEA, in our show description, I've put a link to their website. We're also putting a video there as well, so that you can learn a little bit just through a quick video of ACTEA and the work that David and his team are doing. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.